extremely brief, and I'm going to say that it was a long struggle to reach February 29th, 2012, which is when Pakistan granted India MFN status. My first involvement with this started way back in 1995. It was Benazir's government, and I was on leave from the bank in Lahore, and she asked me to help out with a report done by the Ministry of Commerce. And that report then became the center point for a lot of the analysis that happened subsequently. Basically, what that report tried to do was to do a stakeholder analysis and demonstrate very clearly that gainers far outweigh losers in liberalizing trade with India, and therefore we must proceed with it. However, there were very powerful lobbies, particularly among the sections of manufacturing sector, who were opposed to the idea, and they, I would say, in some kind of a loose alliance with the security establishment, continued to thwart it for a long period of time. And then finally, a promise was made to the counterparts across the border that Pakistan would move towards granting MFN status, and that it would happen in February, and that upon our heart, we can give a solid word it would happen. We kept our fingers crossed. It had to be a cabinet decision, and cabinet meets every Wednesday, and it had to be in February, so that the words could be kept. It so happened that 2012 was a leap year. February 29th was a Wednesday, so we managed to push it through. We managed to push it through. The government managed to push it through. Now, so I think one can declare victory and say this topic is not closed. We have opened up trade with India, and manna will begin to flow. I'm afraid, given India-Pakistan relations, things will not be that straightforward. This will be a rocky road. It will be a jagged trajectory. Things will move up and down. And the reason is that there's a lot of history on both sides. And that history intervenes and puts economic rationality to one side. And countries can take fairly drastic action. India-Pakistan's difficulties started very early on, and you would be surprised, or you would not be surprised, given the history, the culture, the geography, that in 1947, India was the largest trading partner of Pakistan. And that continued despite the Kashmir War in 1948. It was over a disagreement on exchange rate management that difficulties began to arise in 1949. Pakistan, which was a commodity exporting country, Pakistan was, believe it or not, surplus even in wheat. And India imported wheat, cotton, and jute from Pakistan. Pakistan was looking at the Korean War and its aftermath, which would have resulted in a commodity price boom. Pakistan's reserve position looked good. Both India and Pakistan were tied to the sterling. Sterling devalued against the dollar. India followed suit. Pakistan decided not to. And that meant the import prices of jute went up for India. And India decided to import a heavy tax on the import of jute, which seemed counterproductive. And a very interesting discussion began between the two governments. And in fact, Ministry of Finance, Pakistan, put out budget speeches right up to 1985. And let me quote Finance Minister Ghulam Muhammad in his 1950-51 budget speech. He says, "I regard it as highly unfortunate that instead of facilitating the normal flow of trade between the two countries, the government of India should have embarked on a boycott of trade with us. While fixation of the rate of currency is entirely a question of each country to decide with reference to its circumstances, trade is a matter of prices. India, however, has taken the extraordinary unfriendly step of boycotting trade with us, judging from the fact that our trade with other countries continues to flow freely, and led to the conclusion that India's action is motivated by political rather than economic considerations. This is in line with a series of unfriendly actions in the economic and financial fields that government has taken against Pakistan since partition. You can see that historical sense of injustice, that historical rivalry, that historical sense of competition begins to manifest itself and begins to affect the trade relationship. But India was not the only one that used used trade as a bargaining chip for other objectives. Both India and Pakistan were original signatories to GATT. And GATT was established in 1947 in order to liberalize trade, in order to have a more globalized economy. A special article was inserted in the GATT treaty, which was relevant for only for India and Pakistan, because they were the original signatories. That clause 11 in Article 24 was inserted. And let me read that out to you. Taking into account the exceptional circumstances arising out of the establishment of India and Pakistan as independent states, and recognizing the fact that they have long constituted an economic unit, the contracting parties agree that the provisions of this agreement shall not prevent the two countries from entering into special arrangements with respect to the trade between them, pending the establishment of the mutual trade relations on a definitive basis. Now, how would you interpret this clause? The only way to interpret this clause is that GATT was saying you can have an even more free trade between yourselves than you have with other countries. Pakistan, meanwhile, had started to reap the benefits of the trade blockade with India. And the basis of import substitution industrialization was laid as a result of that. So now we begin to see a very interesting coalition of the newly industrializing entrepreneurs of Pakistan and the security establishment, which resulted in an interpretation of this clause completely the opposite of what was originally intended. Pakistani diplomats argued very successfully, that's correct, that this clause allows us to have an even more restrictive trade vis-a-vis India than vis-a-vis the rest of the world. So we can continue to be founding members of GATT while discriminating heavily against India. So both countries were happy to use to play with the economic tools in order to actually roll out the respective political agendas. So I expect that because of this history, and because this history has continued to intervene throughout the 60 years since 47, and the Mumbai incident was a very good example. The reaction to Mumbai was a terrible incident. Nobody can condone it. But this sort of collective punishment approach that India took as a result of the Mumbai incident, nobody can guarantee that these incidents will not happen again. But if the reaction is to say, suspend all relationships, including trade relationships, it will make it very difficult for this relationship to bring the results that I think it can. So what results can it bring? And I think this is where both India and Pakistan need to focus. Pakistan more so, because I think our new growth bent, we've had 4 or 5 growth bents in our history. Kalan colonies was an 80-year growth bent. It gave us a growth, productivity increase over a long period of 80 years, and it improved people's living conditions. After that, starting in the early 50s, we had a 20-year growth bent of import substituting industrialization. That gave us growth, but we became the poster child of the world as a developing country that can get its act together and can deliver 6% growth over a sustained period of time. We got it. We had it for almost 3 decades. After that, the next growth event was the Green Revolution technology. That increased agricultural yields substantially, and we got a 20-25-year kick out of that. After that were remittances and consumption-led growth phase, which gave us growth for another 20 years or so. All of those bends have now played out their roles, and we're looking for a new growth bend. And the best growth bends are created when you turn a weakness into your strength. A weakness that is retarding your growth, a weakness that is retarding your productivity, if you can turn it around and turn it into your strength, that gives you longest sustained growth bend possible. India, for example, a major weakness in India is inland transportation and the ports on the sea. The cost of doing business behind the borders in India has been huge for many, many years because of very, very poor infrastructure. That weakness was turned into strength when India went into IT business, because suddenly you created a business environment that did not at all rely on what was India's critical weakness. Pakistan needs to think along similar lines. And what I'm going to do, just with some charts, is to demonstrate how something which has become a weakness for Pakistan was not always the case. Historically, it was our strength. Historically, we are what we are because of our location, because of our geography. But of late, that has become our weakness because we've started to look at our neighbors from a military, strategic, territorial angle rather than an economic, financial angle. And what I'm going to say is that if you go back to our history, there's a lot of growth to be achieved. So let me sort of fast forward my presentation. You will need to have some here. Keep going till you come to the first map. Okay. Now, the green bit is Pakistan, and we are on our north surrounded by. There are two arches. The first arch is the Farsi-speaking people's arch. That's Iran, Afghanistan, and Tajikistan. This is when the first incursions and the first influences began in what is now Pakistan. If you look around you, if you talk to ethnographers, they'll tell you that these are the initial traces. And in fact, people on the other side of the Indus are still pure stock, Irani stock. Then we have another arch which is above the Farsi-speaking people's arch, which is the Turkic tribes. This is Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, and Western China, Kashgar area. The next set of incursions into what is now Pakistan came from that region. And our history, our culture, our language is very much defined by those incursions. And of course, we were continuing to, if you click on it, it will, yeah, that's the first incursion. Click again. That's the second, the Turkic tribes coming. Click again. And again. It's the amalgam of these historical trends that makes Pakistan. It makes our culture, it makes our history, it makes our language, it makes our cuisine, it makes our dress. So it was a historical strength. What did that mean in terms of trade routes? And some students and alums and I, we are now beginning to look at historical evidence of the trade routes that existed as a result of this geopolitical situation. Can you move to the next one? Go to the next one. These were the historical trade routes, centered around Peshawar and Taxila, connecting markets to the east with markets to the west. Multan, Lahore, doing the same thing in the center of what is now Pakistan. Upper Sindh, doing the same thing, connecting markets in Iran with markets which in Gujarat and now India. And these four regions in what is now Pakistan were primary beneficiaries of these long historical trade routes. The reason why so many Sufi saints came to what is now Upper Sindh and southern Punjab was because there were surpluses that could host those Sufi saints. And those surpluses were the result of these trading routes. Now, of course, fast forward to the colonial period, Anglo-Russian rivalries created Afghanistan, and the northwestern routes were blocked off. The British were not particularly interested in promoting relations with Iran. That route was blocked off. Post-47, we cut off the routes, the trade route with India. But what we did create, and thanks to the early economic managers of Pakistan, what we did create was a very strong north-south route. Can you go to the next one? This corridor is a very recent corridor. It is, in terms of infrastructure, perhaps the most modern in South Asia. And for the first time in history, those four centers that I earlier showed you, they got connected for the first time in history. And this gave us growth for 4 decades, starting in the early 50s. This is the growth that has now run its course. And this is the growth now that needs to be reinvigorated. And what I'm trying to argue is that liberalizing trade with India as part of liberalization of regional trade and economic relations is what will reinvigorate the north-south corridor again. Go to the next slide. Keep going. These bits of slides are all about relative strengths of Indian and Pakistani economy and how they have changed over time, basically emphasizing the need for Pakistan to get its act together and to look at this new. To go back, these graphs, and I can talk more about it during the discussion time if people are interested. These graphs actually show how countries surrounding, his clock says 7 minutes, yours says 5 minutes. Okay, you made me lose my thread, so deduct 1 minute. Basically, what we are now putting together evidence, and this is for Rashid's book. What we are now trying to do is to put together evidence to show what kind of economic surpluses now exist in Central Asian republics, in Iran, in China, and India, that Pakistan can tap into by opening the historical trading routes. And you will see from these graphs that these surpluses are substantial and they are increasing much more rapidly than the growth and investment we are experiencing in Pakistan. And if you're surrounded by a neighborhood which is doing far better than you, regardless of whether it is the eastern neighborhood or the neighborhood to the north, in the east you've got a billion economy, 7-8% growth after this current hiccup is over. In the north you've got a billion plus economy, 8 to 10% growth after the current difficulties are over. To the west you've got economies with huge surpluses in oil and gas. And economies that have, if you look at their development objectives, they have set themselves as achieving Malaysia standards by the year 2020. So they're extremely ambitious, and you see it in terms of foreign direct investment that's coming into these economies. And we are sitting right in the center of that. And I think opening up those east-west trade corridors that I pointed out will be the way to tap into those surpluses. Our relationship with India will count for, I think, significantly more than the relationship with other countries. And the reason is that there are very interesting and exciting complementarities between Indian and Pakistani manufacturing. Pakistan Business Council, which 10, 15 years ago when I first started working in this area, would have been a solid block of opposition against liberalizing trade with India. But they asked me to help put together a report, which I think was critical in moving the decision process in Islamabad, in which that whole bloc has turned towards opening trade with India, towards having a much closer economic relationship with India. And entrepreneur after entrepreneur, we interviewed entrepreneurs in 5 critical sectors of the economy: pharmaceuticals, tire and rubber, textiles, agriculture, and others, and automobile parts. And entrepreneur after entrepreneur was saying that there are huge knowledge spillovers that they could benefit from by liberalizing the economic relationship with India. And they are not looking just to the trade relationship. They are looking to a much broader economic relationship, which involves something along the lines that Sikandar was discussing in his paper yesterday, which is a subcontracting arrangement, which goes far beyond just the trade relationship. So I think the will is there, the opportunity is there, but I think if we embed the relationship with India in the larger regional relationship, it will help us overcome some of the historical angst that we have with the neighbors to our east. And the same thing with India. I think India too needs to get over the historical angst and look at Pakistan not from the perspective of short-term tactical, I'm sitting on this line on sanction and I'm not going to move because I'm here, and things like that, to a much broader regional perspective. Not all development routes have to go through sweatshops catering to affluent Western consumers. This is a potentially very vibrant, very robust region with more than 2.5 billion people population. There's no reason why this region should not be able to deal with the world on its own terms. And if India sees itself as a major player rolling out that strategy, India will begin to look at Pakistan in a larger regional context than the current bilateral thing, which results in things like whole-scale sanctions